is a lawyer and a historian, et cetera, but he wrote a book about Okinawa, but it's a novel about Okinawa.
Okay.
So Todd wanted me just to recognize him and let him tell us just a little bit about his book.
Gotcha.
But so the way I'll do this is once Sean throws it to me, I'll just introduce you, Laura. I'll introduce you, Henry, and I'll also introduce Al and ask Al to give us 30 seconds or so on his book. And then I plan to introduce our two veterans. And when I introduce the two veterans, I have the pictures you sent me, Neal, and I have one picture of you, Jack, as a very young 18-year-old Marine. And so I'll just throw those pictures up and just start with the deep background, where you guys grew up and, why you joined the Marines at 17, how did your parents let you do that, right? And once you joined, obviously you guys went to boot camp just a month or two apart from each other. And then you ended up, in the units you did. Once I get to that point and you're on Okinawa or about to go to Okinawa, I'll throw the program to Laura. Laura has her PowerPoint. Laura, we'll make sure you have control of the screen so you can go through the PowerPoint.
Perfect.
And then like you did in our practice session last week, you did just a great job of telling the story of the Battle of Okinawa, but also interviewing our two veterans at the same time about their experiences.
Good.
And then Henry, I thought when we get towards the end of that, I would introduce you again and ask you, Henry, to read the paragraph from With the Old Breed that you want to read.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
The paragraph.
Let's check. Sorry to interrupt. We'll check Al's audio real quick right before we start at 7. But go ahead.
I was going to say too, when Neal's talking about Sugarloaf, that time when we're talking about the pest and stuff like we did last time too, would be a great time too.
Okay, Laura. When we get to that point, then we'll bring Henry on. And what page?
There are 2 paragraphs. I'll only read one because, like I said, we've got men who are there plus Laura. I just want to stay in the background, but I've got 2 paragraphs on the same page. Okay. Neal, Glenn, it's page 253. Just 2 paragraphs that I think really,
absolutely,
just kind of capture the kind of environment
I was listening to Dan Carlin this afternoon, Hardcore History, and he was quoting your dad, I think, those exact paragraphs.
Dan is Dan's a friend of mine. He's going to be on my podcast in a couple of weeks, actually. So I thanked him for all he said about that. Mm-hmm. So
it's 7. I'm going to go ahead and let everybody in.
Okay, Sean, it's
Thank you, Al. We'll roll with your audio for the beginning. Hi, everyone.
Okay.
Welcome, everyone, to Veterans Breakfast Club for Thursday, April 28th. This is VBC Greatest Generation Live with Glenn Flickinger. My name is Sean Hall. I'm Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. So good to see you all again. I was out last week at my brother's wedding down in North Carolina, where it was gorgeous. And then I came back to 30-degree weather, which Glenn and I were just talking about. It's a beautiful day today. And we have a great program lined up for you all tonight. Speaking about Okinawa, we have many guests, 2 veterans, Jack Morrow and Neal Mccallum, who are both there at Okinawa. We have historian Laura Lacey. We have author Al Dawson. We also have Henry Sledge with us, son of, I'm forgetting your father's first name, Henry.
Eugene Sledge.
Eugene, it slipped out of my mind. I'm so sorry. Eugene Sledge, author of With the Old Breed. It's going to be a wonderful program. Before we jump over to Glenn to introduce everyone and get into the stories, I'm going to go through some quick announcements. I'm going to share my screen here and talk about what we have coming up next week with the VBC. And hopefully everybody here can see that. We have next week author Rona Simmons, author of A Gathering of Men. She's going to be joining us Monday night. I believe Todd will be back on to host for this program. She's also the author of The Other Veterans of World War II, Stories from Behind the Front Lines. Incredible woman. And we're really excited to have her join us next Monday at 7 p.m. Then next Friday, we were back for our next in-person event at Penn Hills. This is one of my favorites. It's always really well attended, delicious breakfast, great stories. Please join us for that. You can RSVP. I'll put it into the chat to either, you can go online here. You can call this number 412-623-9029, or you can email Betty at veteransbreakfastclub.org, or you can email me. We'll make sure you're on the list. We hope to see you there. And the following Monday, we found this one. Mary Klepper sent us an article, and excuse me, in that article, they talked about Sandra Williams Ortega. She was, as you can see, the first African-American woman directly commissioned as a U.S. Air Force officer. This is the sweetest woman. She hurts my teeth. She calls me every week to check in. She calls and says, "Hi, sweetie, how are you?" Beautiful accent. And we chat for 30 minutes every weekend. She's so excited to come on the program, so excited about the Veterans Breakfast Club. I'm excited to talk to her about her story. And that's her with her husband, Julio, in the shot. So those are some great programs that we have coming up in VBC land, but also we do have to spend a little bit of time here talking about sponsors. D&D Auto Salvage, boy, D&D, they've been supporting us for quite a while now, and we couldn't be happier with them. They are a metal recycling and auto salvage, and they began in a small hauling and used auto parts operation in Pittsburgh back in the 70s, before I was born. I hate saying that, but hey, they've been around for a while. They have two locations, Lawrenceville and Tarentum, and D&D accepts all types of metal, both ferrous and non-ferrous, that may be generated by industrial manufacturing, construction, and demolition, small commercial entities, as well as individual customers. They have a wide variety of material handling equipment and are capable of managing any type of job in a timely and efficient manner. If you need any of this service, you can contact them at D&D autosalvage.com. And also our other sponsor, tobacco-free Adagio Health. I just did a podcast with them, and I'll talk about the Scuttlebutt in a minute. I host the BBC podcast, The Scuttlebutt. Tobacco-free said, we'd love to come on and do an episode. So I brought Don Nemchik on, a Navy veteran from Vietnam, longtime smoker, but he quit back in the 90s. We brought on one of the PR ladies from Tobacco-free. We talked about why it's so prevalent in the military that people smoke. I did not know, and it's something that she goes into, that vaping is really, really bad for you. You think smoking's bad. Vaping's worse. It's crazy how bad it is for you. But I hope that you go ahead and check out that Scuttlebutt that we have on YouTube. But Tobacco-free is dedicated to reducing and preventing tobacco use and to getting the word out about the hazards of smoking and secondhand smoke. They're all about health, so they want to help people quit. They have classes, they have a nicotine replacement therapy, and a popular quit line, which is 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They also educate people, children especially, about tobacco use from cigarettes, cigars, pipes, chew, snuff, and other nicotine products such as vaping. And finally, Tobacco-free Adagio Health advocates for public and private policies that ensure healthy places to live, work, and play. You can learn all about them at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. I'll put their link in the chat if you're interested in connecting with them. Our VBC Magazine, only two more announcements if you've kept with me this long. VBC Magazine, this is a great magazine. Anybody who has read it and reads it front to back, it's incredible. And not just because I work at VBC that I love this magazine. It's a labor of love for us. You get it 4 times a year. If you're not getting it, you're missing out. So please go to our website and sign up for it. You can also sign up to be a member of VBC to help us support all of the programming that you are getting here for free, which is awesome. And the Scuttlebutt. This is the last episode of season 5, which was Shakespeare and Veterans. I thought it'd be cool to go back, talk to some veterans and some Shakespeare historians about all the veterans that are within the Shakespearean canon. If you've ever been interested in that, if you ever saw Henry V or Henry IV or Macbeth or Hamlet, and we're like, wow, these soldiers really know what they're talking about. This podcast is one for you. And we will have one coming out at the start of season 6 on Monday, which will be with Kids Rank, which is a Chicago-based nonprofit. So check out Scuttlebutt. I'll put a link in the chat. Otherwise, that's all the fun that we have going on here. And I got that in under 7 minutes, Glenn. I think that's a record.
Sean, you need to be on broadcast television with that voice and that rapidity of speech that is still clear. I just got to know one thing, Sean. That one lady you spoke about, the veteran, she hurts your teeth.
Yes, Sandy Ortega. She's so sweet. She hurts my teeth. Every time I talk to her, she says,
I got a new one on me. Hurts your teeth. I'm gonna have to Google that and look that up.
You'll love North Carolina. Bless your heart. I mean, that is just North Carolina talk. That's
yeah.
1 week in North Carolina and your teeth hurt.
That's right.
Brad, your teeth hurt? Okay. Sean, thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you, Glenn, and take it away.
Okay, thanks for the great introduction. So, tonight we have a great program. We have several guests, 2 veterans of the Battle of Okinawa. So 77 years ago this month, April 1st of 1945 was Love Day, which was something interesting Laura reminded me of. Wasn't called D-Day, it was called Love Day. And maybe when we introduce Laura, ask her why that was, because it certainly was not a love feast as it turned out. But 77 years ago, the 2 veterans who we have tonight, Neal Mccallum and Jack Morrow, were on Okinawa, serving their country, fighting with the Marines. And we're going to introduce them in a little bit more depth here as we go on. So first, let me introduce Laura Lacey. Laura, wave your hand, say hello there. Okay. So been very pleased to get to know Laura in the past month or so. Was introduced to her actually through Neal Mccallum, who told me about her being the historian for the 6th Marine Division. And I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. How did that come about? And so in talking to Laura, she has a great background in military history. She teaches military history. She lived in Okinawa for several years. Is that right, Laura?
3 years.
Years, lived there with her Marine husband, an aviator. So she's I guess you'd have to call this a three-peat, right, Laura? The wife, daughter, and mother of Marines.
Yeah. So
it's in her blood at this point, right? But she wrote an excellent book. I'll put it up here called Stay Off the Skyline. And this is about the 6th Marine Division experience in Okinawa. And a lot of interviews in here that are just fascinating of the Marines from the 6th Marine Division she got to know, obviously quite well. So highly recommend her book, Stay Off the Skyline. Laura, why Stay Off the Skyline? What's that mean?
Well, the guys named the book. I had other things in my mind. And one of the questions I asked as I was doing the interviews was, you're a 17-year-old kid, everything you know today. What bit of advice would you give that Green Marine in April of 1945? And I'm expecting, don't light a cigarette after dark, keep your feet dry, whatever. Those kinds of little bits of wisdom. And to a man, they said almost stay off the skyline. And as time went on, I began to understand that meant, don't volunteer, keep your head down. And as time has gone by, it's also become a greeting and a goodbye from them as they see each other. And it's a reminder that we all don't live forever.
Yeah, fascinating. Interesting title. And Laura, how did you become the historian for the 6th Marine Division?
So I lived on Okinawa and I did professional military education. I did an 8-hour battle site survey for Marines, started on Green Beach, ended at Suicide Cliffs and everything in between, and got fascinated with the 6th Marine Division in particular because they have such a unique history, stood up overseas, stood down overseas, have never been reactivated. Yeah. And so I got invited to a reunion and happened to meet these guys when they were starting to understand they might not live forever and that history wasn't always telling it like they thought it should be told. And so for the next 10 years, I was just part of the family. And then eventually I decided that their book needed to be written. And I did 47 oral interviews with different guys from the 6th Marine Division. And eventually they decided I might know enough that they went ahead and let the girl be their division historian.
Well, they made a great decision. Excellent decision. I'm always humbled when I start talking to professionals like Laura and others who know so much about these various battles in the Pacific, right? We did that one on Guadalcanal last year, two 1-hour programs separated by an hour. And I would have told you, yeah, I know everything there is to know about Guadalcanal. Just like, oh yeah, I know everything there is to know about Okinawa. Well, when you talk to professionals like Laura, people like Henry Sledge, whom I'm going to introduce next, and of course our veterans, you realize I know just a little bit. And these experienced professional historians get very deep into the story, and you just appreciate it much, much more. So Laura, in a little bit here, Laura's got a great PowerPoint presentation on the Battle of Okinawa. And as part of that, she'll be interviewing our 2 veterans as well. Okay. Next, let me just introduce Henry Sledge, our old friend from last year. Henry, say hello.
Hello.
Okay. We did a program last year with Henry on his father, Eugene Sledgehammer Sledge, and his book. I'll have to hold up again. It's, as you can see, I probably one of these days going to have to go out and buy a new one because it's all falling apart. But it's got notes all over it. But we just couldn't do a program about the Battle of Okinawa and the Marine experience there without having Henry on to comment on the 1st Marine Division and his father's book, With the Old Breed. So thank you for being on, Henry.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. And a little bit later, sort of in the middle or towards the end of Laura's presentation, Henry's going to read a couple of paragraphs from the book about the locations that some of these Marines were at. So it's fairly poignant material. Great book. It's the best book ever written as a personal memoir on war. I think any war. So tough to read. It's so vivid. We also have tonight Al Dawson on the line. Al, how is the video connection, or I'm sorry, the audio connection at this point?
We're all underwater, and probably from my side, but I don't know.
Okay. Well, Al, it is difficult to hear you, so we'll ask you to be pretty quick here. You were introduced to me through Todd. I can't remember how Todd was introduced to you, but you wrote a novel about the Battle of Okinawa, or at least that involves the Battle of Okinawa, called Searching for Noriko. Do I have the title correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they actually, it gets too obnoxious. I can tell you a little bit about what, and as a backdrop, is actually written in time terms and by a veteran who fought in the back character, but it modeled after relatives who were captured in 1942, and they spent 3 years prisoners of the Japanese. Well, you wouldn't really survived. And they were separated, and they came home. Their stories sort of became legend. Most veterans, they really didn't watch about what they went through. You know, you'd get some fascinating stories, and I need to do this as sort of a homage, but at the same time, I didn't want them, but with, 4 or 5, and they wouldn't like that. Instead, I decided to make, and it has a lot to do with the fall of Bataan camps, and to do with the battle director serves in the infantry division.
Al, I'm going to ask you to stop because I think we're only hearing about half of what you're saying. This is like the cell phone connection from hell. And we couldn't solve. We tried to solve it before the program started. We couldn't. But the little bit I'm getting, it sounds very interesting. Perhaps let me do this: is I'll let Todd know that we tried to have you on tonight. And maybe on one of our other programs, not necessarily Greatest Generation Live, Todd could work you in to talk about your novel. Okay. Hopefully we'll get a better connection.
And I did put the link to your novel in the chat here, and I'll put it on our Facebook feed and our YouTube feed as well.
Okay. Okay.
That'd be great. Thank you, guys. Noise.
Okay, thank you, Al. So let us get to the main event here, which is introducing our 2 Marine Corps veterans from the Battle of Okinawa. Jack and Neal. Jack, let me ask you to say hello first.
Hello there.
There he is. Jack Morrow from the Pittsburgh area, living currently in, I think, Bethel Park, as I recall. Is that right, Jack?
That is correct.
Yeah. And Jack, where did you grow up?
In Katanning, Pennsylvania.
Okay. Katanning, Pennsylvania, just up the river.
That is correct.
Okay. And Jack, what year were you born?
Pardon me?
What was your birthday? When were you born?
December 6th, 1925.
Aha. So you joined the Marines at what age, Jack?
17.
Wow. And why did you decide to join the Marines at 17, Jack? And how did that happen?
I joined at that age because I wanted to avoid the draft where they would send me where they wanted to send me.
Yeah. Yeah. As I recall, the Marine Corps recruiters had a special program where they would look for 17-year-olds who exactly your circumstances, right? And so explain how the recruiters got a hold of you. When they must have talked to you when you were 16, when you were still in high school, a sophomore in high school.
Oh no, I just read about the Marines because Guadalcanal and all those, and so it came time to go in the service. I looked in the door at the Marine Corps place, and I'd never gone any further.
Okay.
Actually, I was supposed to go down and enlist in the Navy, but didn't make it that far.
Was it the uniform?
No, it was something fascinating about the Marine Corps at that time because they were on all the headlines.
Yeah. So your parents had the sign off on you joining at 17, correct?
Oh yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
No matter which service I was in, they would have had to sign it.
Right. Right. So when did you actually start boot camp? You went to Parris Island, I would guess, for boot camp?
That is correct.
Yeah.
I had my 18th birthday at Parris Island.
Okay. 18th birthday at Parris Island. Let's see here. I'd like to show a picture of Jack here. Sean, do I have the ability to share the screen?
You should now.
Okay.
What's the picture I have in front of me now? It has more than meetings. I'm not seeing anything about the Zoom meeting.
Just a minute here, Jack. I'm going to show you a picture that Todd DiPastino sent me. And there it is. Can everybody see that?
Handsome guy.
Sean? Or,
Yep, we can, yes.
yeah, okay.
I don't have it.
You-
I
you-
have a story about Zoom meetings
Huh. Okay, I'm not quite sure why
on
you're
my
not.
screen.
I'm not quite sure why he's not seeing it, Sean. Can everybody else see it? Laura, you
Yeah, I
see
think
it?
I see
unless
it.
he might be on his phone. I'm not sure why it wouldn't pop over that way.
Okay,
But you are sharing it, yes.
yeah. Not sure why you're not seeing it, Jack, but let me tell you,
Oh, I lost you. Okay,
can you hear me?
I can still hear you.
Okay. Well,
But
the picture is you at 17 and a half or 18 years old. I would say it's very close to movie star quality here. Right there, Laura.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Handsome guy.
Handsome guy. I wouldn't want to let you near my daughter at that age at this time. But this is you as a very young Jack Morrow, I imagine, just into the Marines. Perhaps it's your picture they take when you graduate from Paris Island, I would guess. Okay. It's the only picture we could find, Jack, that this is a picture that I think Todd used back when you were first on our VBC program 2 or 3 years ago. Okay.
Was I wearing my green uniform? Oh, there I am. Yes. That's the one that was pictures taken in San Diego when I got back.
So this is 1940, late 45?
46.
46. Okay. So here
When I come back to be discharged.
you're a very ripe 20 years old at this point.
Yes.
Very seasoned Marine at this point. Okay. So Jack, your story, you joined the Marines, you go to Paris Island, and at some point you volunteer or get chosen. I can't remember how that went. How did you get involved in the radar?
Well, at that time, they were still doing questionnaires in boot camp. So what would you be interested in doing? And I said radar, and I got it.
What did you know about radar in 1944?
Only thing I knew about was his new.
Yeah. Okay. And then after boot camp, did you go to Camp Lejeune for further infantry training?
For my training on the radar, yes.
Training on the radar. Okay. Yeah. And when did you get assigned to the 5th Marine Anti-Aircraft Battalion?
That would have been in the fall of 1944 on the island of Kauai.
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 Now that's a place to be stationed at Kauai. That's
it was nice there.
I bet you. It's nice there now. I know that. Okay. And when did your unit ship out for Okinawa, Jack?
I'm not sure of the date. It's probably somewhere in April.
Right.
After the landings were done, because we never got there till much later. Right. So I was probably at sea all that time, and till we got to Okinawa.
Right. And what was the name of the airfield that your battalion set up nearby to protect?
Kadena.
Right. Okay. We'll stop there for now, Jack. And then once Laura gets involved in telling the story of the battle, as you know, she'll be asking you a lot more questions about your experience. Okay. So let me move next to Neal Mccallum. Neal, please say hello to our audience.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Neal. Nice to see you again. I've been very, very privileged. This is like now the 3rd or 4th time I've been able to talk to Neal. Neal's a very vivacious 96 or 7 years old.
Five would do very just right.
Okay. So, Neal, what you have in common with Jack is that you joined the Marines at 17.
Yes, I was born in 1927 as well. Yes, I did when I was 17 and 10 days old, as a matter of fact.
And where were you living? Where were you raised?
Living in central North Carolina, in the Sand Hill area next to Pinehurst, the golf mecca of the world.
Yeah, yeah, nice place. Very nice track. And why the Marines for you?
Well, I had four brothers that were already one was a flyer in the Navy, and the other three were they were going to be in the European theater. So I was the only one left, and I wanted to go to the Marines because of I'd been indoctrinated by Jack London with all these Call of the Wild books and reading his book, Cruise of the Snark to the Solomon Islands. And so I think it was just to be adventuresome. And also I saw the movie Guadalcanal Diary,
Right.
based on a novel by Richard Trajewski. And that influenced a lot of Marines to go, a lot of guys to go in the Marines, I can assure you.
Yep. Yep. The Marines did a great job during the war of recruiting, right? They had to, because they were hard to recruit.
Stay alive.
I'm sorry, say again, Neal?
That's how they remained being a Marine Corps. Several times wanted to do away with it.
Yep. Yep. That's right. Very close call at times in the history of the Marines as to whether there would be Marines at all.
Correct.
So, and you went to boot camp at Paris Island when?
Yes, in March 20th, 1944. And I thought I knew everything. And I was telling the drill instructor that I met there how much I knew about the Marines and so forth. But I found out I didn't know very much.
I'm sure they didn't like the idea that you might have known more than them.
Well, we got there as a group of individuals, but when we graduated 2 months later, we were all one body, we thought one way, and we knew what we were all about.
Yeah. So from Camp Lejeune, you went on to from Paris Island, I imagine you went on to Camp Lejeune.
Yes, to Camp Lejeune, and I was put in a Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 29th Marines. And with the 3rd Battalion, 29th Marines, we entrained and took the southern route to San Diego, where we had a brief stop, maybe 5 or 6 days there. And we soon departed for Guadalcanal. And we left San Diego on August 1st and arrived there on the 17th of August. Right. It's a 16-day voyage when you factor in that we crossed the timeline. Yeah. And so we arrived there at the morning then of the 17th, and it was the most beautiful looking island, just like Jack London described it in his Cruise of the Snark. Yeah. But little did I know that was a hellish place to be.
Well, by that time, it had become a vast logistics depot for the Marines and the Navy, right? For training and staging and so forth, right?
Yes, for the 6th Marine Division, but you're right about the depot for supplies and all the material that we would need on Okinawa or Formosa. We didn't know where we were going at the time.
Yeah, yeah. And was the 29th Marine Division at that time, was it part of the 6th 29th Regiment? Was it part of the 6th Marine Division? It was.
Yes, just a few days after we were there, and I think September the 7th, that we became a division, and we joined up with the 22nd Marines, which had seen a lot of combat before on Guam and also in the Marshall Islands. And the same thing with the 4th Marine Regiment, which was composed mostly of the old Raider battalions, parachute companies. And, it was a group of combat veterans with a lot of combat experience.
So you board ship and you start heading out. When do you find out that you're going to Okinawa?
Well, about 7 months later. We had the training was 7 months on Guadalcanal, and it was very arduous training and very, very hard. And of course, there's a lot of tropical diseases there, malaria, and we didn't have quinine. The Japanese had all that, and the Philippines and the Dutch, Indonesia, and so we had substitute for quinine. It's called Atibrant tablets that made you turn yellow, as if you had a liver condition. And we had all kinds of tropical diseases, amoebic things, and skin ulcers, intense heat, rain. And that's the kind of training we had. And General Shepard said that he had to put the boys through this kind of training to bring them back alive.
Right. So Neal, I don't know if you can see it, but you had sent me some pictures. I put a couple of them up here on the screen. Can everybody see that? Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Another very handsome young man on the right side there. When was that taken, Neal?
Well, I was looking at the hospital with a group of sailors.
Okay.
Yes, that picture was taken in USNH Hospital in Portsmouth, Virginia. It's still there. And notice my waistline, by the way.
You're talking about the pictures where you're holding some flowers.
Oh no, that's another picture. That was a picture when I got a 30-day convalescent leave to come home.
This is after the battle. Okay.
Yes, this is after I'm in the States now in the hospital in Virginia. Okay. And yes, that's I know that I didn't realize I had given you that picture.
Okay. Yeah, I understand. Okay. So Neal, I'm going to stop now and ask Laura Lacey, our historian and expert on this topic, to take the screen. And Laura, walk us through the Battle of Okinawa and the experience of these two veterans.
All right. So do you have the PowerPoint up, or do I need to get, I thought you.
No, I never did get it from you, Laura. So.
Okay, hold on then.
I got you. Yeah, you are a co-host, Laura, so you should be able to pull it up.
Okay, let me pull it up then.
While we're waiting for that, Rick asked, do Jack and Neal recall the ships they were deployed on?
I do, yes. The ship that I went to Guadalcanal on was the General Morton, USS General Morton. And the ship that I left Guadalcanal for Okinawa was the USS George C. Clymer, named after one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. I'm sorry. Yes, but he signed both documents.
Jack, do you remember your ship? Jack, are you still there?
Did we lose Jack?
We might have lost Jack. Let me look here.
Can you guys see the video?
I don't see Jack. We may have lost him, just so you know.
Okay. Can you guys see the video?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. So hopefully Jack will join us again in a few minutes. It's wonderful to be here and to be able to talk about this battle, because I think it's one of those battles that gets lost in history because there was so much other history going on around it. And likewise, the Striking Six has such a unique history in that when these gentlemen are no longer with us, they haven't been passing their stories on to members of the 1st Marine Division, for example, like the people in Mr. Sledge's unit could have been doing. These guys were kind of all by themselves. The other thing that's really interesting is the week of their last reunion, which was in September, we were able to repatriate their battle flag and actually get it to the Marine Corps Museum here at Quantico. So it's something I'm very, very proud of that we were able to accomplish. It had kind of been procured and disappeared for a while. So we finally got it going. So why Okinawa? Why is important? Neal mentioned that they didn't know whether they were going to Formosa or whether they were going to Okinawa. This was all part of the island hopping. When the war began, there had always been the understanding that Europe was first. And in part because getting through the Pacific was going to take such a different kind of plan, because you couldn't just fly over there then. You know, you were going to have to island hop, go from island to island to island until we were within fighting range of the Japanese. And we knew that once we've got to that point, it was going to be a bloody mess, a brutal battle because of everything that had gone on so far. And as we can see, this is kind of how it goes. We start at Pearl Harbor, we start then at Tarawa, we have Guadalcanal, we have all of the Marianas and Saipan. And then, of course, in February of 1945, we're going to get to Iwo Jima, which was so incredibly brutal, it blew people's minds. And then, of course, we have the incredible Rosenthal picture, which has become the mythos of the Marine Corps. And that is going to have a big impact on the history of Okinawa in the sense that it kind of gets lost in some ways. And then we are going to have Okinawa. Why Okinawa and not Formosa? Some people will tell you that one of the reasons that we went to Okinawa and Formosa instead of Formosa was to keep Nimitz and MacArthur apart just a little bit longer. There was lots of issues between some of these commanders, and that is one of the reasons that is sometimes cited. However, probably the most important reason that Okinawa was picked was Naha is a phenomenal harbor, and it's 350 miles from mainland Japan. This is going to be our stopping off point, so to speak. The Okinawan people are a unique people. They were not treated like Japanese, even though Okinawa was a prefecture of Japan. The Okinawans were seen as a lesser people. The Japanese had taken over Okinawa, had kind of paupered the people. At one time, Okinawa had been the Venice of Asia and were more inclined to be like the Chinese than the Japanese. But as it is, the Japanese have had artillery bases. They've had a military presence on Okinawa for a long time. And when we get to Okinawa, what Okinawa is going to mean is going to be that last bastion for the Japanese before we go into their mainland Japan. And so Wadu Sejima, who is the general on Okinawa, the Japanese general of the 32nd Army, is going to do is he is going to take a different approach than has ever been done before in these battles as we've island hopped along, in that he is not going to meet us at the beaches, which is what we're expecting. And in fact, on April 1st, somebody sent a message back to Nimitz and said, you know what? You can think I'm crazy, but I think the Japs have given up and gone home. And Nimitz sent a telegram back and said, delete all but the crazy. Because April 1st, we're going to walk onto this island and everybody is thinking that this is going to be a bloody mess. And in keeping with it being April 1st, Easter Sunday, April 1st is also April Fool's Day, and the Japanese fooled us. The units who are going to go into Okinawa are the 1st Marine Division, which Mr. Sledge's father was a member of, the 6th Marine Division, which Neal was a member of, and And then they're going to have the 2nd Marines are going to be, as you can see down in the bottom of the map here, they're going to be doing a fete on the southern end of the island. And then about 10 days in, they'll be withdrawn. The 1st and the 6th will come in up here. And of course, we also have the Army. It is the 10th Army, controlled by Simon Bolivar Buckner. And in that, we're going to have the 24th, the 7th, the 27th, the 77th, the 81st, 81st, and the 96th. And those are going to be the guys who are going to come in on that Sunday morning and start this invasion. The Marines are going to go north up towards Ishikawa, and the Army is going to go south. We do not know that at that time, Usajima has withdrawn to right about there near Nagagusku Bay to what will become known as the Shuri Line of defense. The Shuri Castle sits kind of right in the center. And in fact, one time when Commodore Perry came there, the Okinawans tried to trick him and make him think that the island was real big by wandering the streets to get to Shuri Castle when it's only a couple miles from Naha. So anyway, they will make this invasion. They will head north. The Marines will head north. And they will run into primarily their first real encounters with the Japanese up at a place called Yaidaki with General Cho. Now, I want to stop for a minute because I want to get these guys in here. Did we ever get Jack back or no? Is Jack back? Don't think so.
Jack
yes,
is
I'm back.
on, yes.
Okay, you're back. So Jack,
My computer overheated and shut off.
okay. So Jack, you're going to go to Kadena, you said.
Yes.
And Kadena is going to be right about here. Kadena Airfield is right here. Okay. And you're going to go in and you're going to set up your radar. Correct?
Yes.
And what are you going to be doing from that time on? What is going to be your primary thing that you're going to be doing from then on?
Well, to intercept any airplanes coming in to bomb the airfield.
Right. And
we would get a warning from our long range radar.
have we lost him?
Seems like he may have froze.
Okay.
Oh, he's back.
Yeah.
So your picture of the battle was limited in that respect, right? You were more worrying about the air assets of things more than
You're
anything, right?
Yes.
One of the things that you and I talked about the other night, which I think since we're talking about this early time in April is important to talk about, Jack, is 13 days into this, and then I'm going to tell a Kadena story. 13 days into this, a big event happened, and that was we lost President Roosevelt.
Yes.
And we talked the other day. What was your feeling when you heard that President Roosevelt was dead?
I knew it probably wouldn't matter to the war effort because everything was in place. We would just get a new commander-in-chief.
And for many of these young men, especially people like Jack and Neal, that is pretty much the only president they had ever known. So this did have a huge impact just as far as a psyche thing. But I've got a funny Kadena story. One of the things that people expected was it was going to take weeks and weeks and weeks to get this island wrapped up. As we know, it's going to take 82 days. But one of the things they thought it was going to take like 20 days just to get to Kadena Airfield. And that wasn't the case. By the middle of the afternoon, they were already at Kadena Air Base. And there's a story that, you know, whether it's one of those sea stories or not, that you hear over and over, is how at Kadena midday, they're getting all the old planes off the airfield, trying to get things squared away. And all of a sudden, here comes a Japanese plane into the Kadena airfield. The guy stops, gets out, pulls off his parachute, looks around, realizes that they aren't Japanese, they're Americans. He pulls out his pistols, they blow him away, and they say, you know, there's always one poor bastard who doesn't get the word. So it's going to be much quicker than they had ever thought. I mentioned before that the Marines are going to go up this way. By when, Jack, Neal, do they have the northern end of the island taken?
I think by the 22nd of April.
By the 22nd of April, they have this much of the island taken care of. Their only real resistance, Neal, was up here at Mount Yaidaki. What was going to go on there?
Well, that was a very serious problem. We attacked using all three regiments. It was very difficult, and we had a lot of assistance from the USS Tennessee and the Colorado.
Right.
And most of our casualties were there in that area.
Right. And the other thing that's important, you know, when you were talking, you talked about the 6th Marine Division, you talked about the 4th, the 29th and the 22nd. You also had the 15th Artillery was with you as well. And yeah. They're going to do a lot of good work up there as well, aren't they?
Absolutely. And don't forget about the mortar section now.
Yeah, no, and can't forget those mortarmen as well. Also, yeah. If you'll look at the picture, you'll also note that there's a little island off the coast there. That is an island called Ayashima. They still fly planes in and out of there. My husband has flown on that island many, many times, and that is the island that Ernie Pyle will be killed on. Correct. That is where Ernie Pyle is going to be killed. But while we're talking about artillery, just to give you some numbers, the softening up before the Marines got there, they did 13,000 large caliber shells. That's one of the reasons why it's called the Typhoon of Steel. The Okinawans called it, from 6 to 16 inches. That is 5,162 tons of artillery or ammunition that was done even before the battle began. So a lot of this area that had been softened up quite a bit for this fortress that they were going up against. Neal, anything else you want to tell me about that southern end of the island? I mean, the northern end of the island?
We killed quite a number of Japanese there, and of course, quite a few got away, and would be like stragglers. And I had the privilege of talking to one when I went back to Okinawa, and they existed for a long time before giving up. They were living off of rice balls and living in the very caves. But that's about it. I'm going to say that it was not a difficult operations, but the kill ratio is a little bit under what happened in the South.
Right.
So we thought the war was over. I think we need to maybe bring that out, is that our job was done.
We will.
It was up to the Army to do their job.
Right. So on that day, April 1st, I know, Jack, you came in later, but in those early days, what did that armada look like out there? Tell me about that armada.
Well, there's 1,498 ships there. They're the greatest armada that ever existed.
And it's also the first time that we had a joint task force. We had the British there as well. And a thing that's really interesting, the British ship's decks were made out of metal, whereas the American decks were made out of wood. And therefore, when the kamikazes would hit the British ships, it really didn't do anything. They just swept them off. But the kamikazes are going to be a huge factor in this, aren't they, guys?
Yes, absolutely. It was almost untenable to live below decks on these British ships because of that. They had no air conditioning or anything like that. But the disadvantage was that they were slow. They couldn't keep up with the American fast carriers.
Sure.
Their job was to defend Okinawa from aircraft coming from Formosa.
Right. And we had the largest loss in our Navy's history at Okinawa.
Yes, more than the Marines and Army on Okinawa.
And well, also of ships, we will have 368 that will be damaged and 36 that will actually be sunk as well.
Yes, correct. And that's why Admiral Nimitz pressured General Buckner, because Buckner was slow and methodical and wanted to win the battle the easy way, with artillery. But the artillery had little effect to Japanese in caves. And therefore, all these ships were exposed to kamikaze attacks. The most memorable one was on the 6th of April when the battleship Yamato, broke away and came on a one-way trip to Okinawa. That's when I think about 600 kamikaze planes, they were called floating chrysanthemums by the Japanese, and they took a big toll. Of course, we were able to see all of that, and it took place mostly about twilight.
Mm-hmm. So you make this landing, and I'm going to ask the question that I asked many years ago. It's L Day, 1945. What was most impressive about that day for you?
Give me the day again, date.
It's April 1st, 1945, L Day.
Oh, excuse me. Yes. Well, that was very nervous. Although I'd rather go into combat than go back to Guadalcanal. That's how.
So one of the other things that I think is so important and not misunderstood, but not talked about enough, and I know that my guys get very annoyed about it, and I'm sure that Mr. Sledge used to as well, is that on D-Day, there are all of these huge reports, but Love Day was actually larger than D-Day. At Normandy, there were 150,000 troops, and there were about 574,000 tons of supplies that had to go across the canal. I'm being funny when I say the canal. And then when you talk about Okinawa, you had 183,000 men in that initial assault. You had all of those ships. You had 750,000 pounds of supplies, and you had a 4,000 nautical mile supply chain.
Well said.
So that is something that to me is so amazing when you think about that battle in particular compared to other battles. There will be the largest loss of life on Okinawa, except for Stalingrad. And there will be more Marines and Navy personnel killed on Okinawa than any other battle in the Pacific.
Yes, that's quite true. And you mentioned April 1st. What I stopped I stopped worrying about. We were perplexed, but it only took a few days that we realized that this was just one big plan that Ushijima had for the Marine Corps and Army. That he was inviting us to his party, and he wanted to inflict as much damage to us so that we would complain to our mothers and fathers would complain to Congress, and Congress would complain to President Truman, and that we would agree to a surrender without occupation of Japan. And of course,
It was a war of attrition.
yes. And so the longer that he prolonged the battle as much as he could to give Tokyo and Japan time to prepare for Operation Downfall.
So you mentioned it a minute ago. Your war's over. Your battle's over. You've gone to Nago. You guys have some cat houses up and running. You know, you're taking showers and those kinds of things, getting some mail, having some chow. But you are starting to hear rumors about what's going on down south. What are you hearing?
Well, we could actually at nighttime see vague flashes from the artillery at night and so forth. We heard that the Army was having a difficult time, and at first the General Buckner only landed two Army divisions, the 96th and the 7th, as you pointed out, and then later he added the 27th, and they still weren't going anyplace. And then it turned out that the 27th didn't fare very well, and so they brought up the 1st Marine Division, who were in the rear of the Army, protecting their rear. They put the 1st Marine Division online, and the Army wanted to break them up and assign them to different Army divisions, but. This was a little bit of infighting between the Army and Marines, but it eventually amounted that the 1st Marine Division took up a position, and the 6th Marine Division came alongside, and we were on the East China Sea side, which is the west side of Okinawa going south.
Mm-hmm. And likewise, you guys, the North, especially the 1st, they're going to hit Kakuzu. They're going to hit Kakuzu first. They're going to come up out of the 27th is going to be replaced. And there are all kinds of stories about the not so nice things that were being said between the two as they went by each other. Because the Marines had thought their part in the battle was over. And now here they go. They have to go down south to fix things, they felt. But they did not, they would soon realize that they had run into something that was a lot tougher than they thought originally, right?
That's correct. We thought, the other Army divisions there, they were crack outfits. They were good outfits, but the 27th Division, they were not very well officered at the battalion level.
They had at one time been a reserve unit that had been augmented, and they had a bad go of it at another time. Another thing that's going to start happening now, about the time that you guys start moving south, is it's going to start to rain. Yes.
We got a smatter of rain around the 14th and 15th when we were invested at Sugarloaf. And the heavy rains would come like on the 21st and 22nd. That would be at a time that General Geiger readjusted the lines. He brought the 1st Marine Division over, Eugene's regiment over, the 5th Marines over to the Crescent, which is also known as Half Moon Hill. And And that was a very difficult a place to be. And Sugarloaf, all and the Horseshoe Ridge, all of this is called the Sugarloaf Triangle. And you would be enfiladed regardless of whichever terrain feature you attacked.
And the combat conditions are going to get continually worse. And I know that Mr. Sledge had wanted to talk a little bit about how bad it can be when you're dealing with the kinds of things these guys had to deal with. Do you want to talk to us about that, Mr. Sledge?
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, Neal has done a phenomenal job along with your questions of setting this up. So just great job listening to this. Such a pleasure. But yeah, there are two paragraphs here in my dad's book with the Old Breed that describe very eloquently exactly where Neal has kind of got us to at this point. And this is when the 5th Marines are really getting into the Half Moon area. The 6th Marine Division, Neal and his guys of the 29th Marines as they're headed south, they're on the right, and the 5th Marines are more in the center as they're approaching the Shuri line. Two quick paragraphs. I'll say them and get them out of the way so the guys can keep talking. The mud was knee deep in some places, probably deeper in others if one dared venture there. For several feet around every corpse, maggots crawled about in the muck and then were washed away by the runoff of the rain. There wasn't a tree or bush left. All was open country. Shells had torn up the turf so completely that ground cover was non-existent. The rain poured down on us as evening approached. The scene was nothing but mud, shell fire, flooded craters with their silent, pathetic, rotting occupants, knocked out tanks and Amtraks, and discarded equipment. Utter desolation. And then one more paragraph. I existed from moment to moment, sometimes thinking death would have been preferable. We were in the depths of the abyss, the ultimate horror of war. During the fighting around the Umarbrogel pocket on Peleliu, I had been depressed by the wastage of human lives. But in the mud and driving rain before Shuri, we were surrounded by maggots and decay. Men struggled and fought and bled in an environment so degrading, I believed we had been flung into hell's own cesspool. And that is what these guys were dealing with, guys like Neal.
Henry, this is Glenn. It's one reason I think the first time I read your father's book, like a lot of times I would read it sort of 9 or 10 o'clock just in the evening, just as I was getting ready for bed. And I actually had to stop reading it at night because I couldn't sleep.
Sure.
After reading, such vivid descriptions of all this. That's how powerful I think this book is.
Yeah.
Very true.
So we've got us set up at the Shuri line. We've got the mud. We've got the maggots. We've got all of that going on. And for the 6th Marine Division, their part in that taking of the Shuri line was down near Naha, in what Neal so amply said is the triangle of Horseshoe, Charlie, and Sugarloaf. And if you look at Sugarloaf, it doesn't look like much, but over a period of several days, it's going to be taken and lost 11 times. Neal, tell us about what was happening with you at this point.
Well, by the time that my battalion and Fox Company in particular, which I was a member of in the mortar section, we just got into the positions that where the 22nd Marines had been before. You might say there was no more organization as the 22nd Marines. They were so shot up that they were no longer effective. And the same thing happened to my battalion and the 29th Marines. And so on the 18th Dog Company of the 2nd Battalion, 29th Marines, took Sugarloaf Hill for the last time. And there were still Japs that were down in the caves, and this was a spacious cave with many compartments down below. and the tanks had got in there and tried to button them up with the explosives. And at the time we had flame throwing tanks, they were mostly army tanks assigned to us, and they did a marvelous job. But there were still Japs inside in the bowels of Sugarloaf.
So most of the artillery had set up at the castle itself, kind of in the center of this area. But they even had artillery pieces inside of caves on railroad tracks that they would roll out and shoot and then push back in. On Sugarloaf itself, like Neal was saying, they literally had spider holes that were interconnected. They had interlocking fire all through this area so that no matter where somebody was, they were in danger of being shot. Is that correct, Neal?
That's correct. And those guns big guns that you were talking about that would come out and fire 3 or 4 rounds and then go back in, those were 150 millimeter artillery guns. They were naval guns that had been brought ashore and placed on railroad tracks. And so they could just shoot them right out of the cave and fire off those rounds and then run it back in and put up camouflage. And we could never get an azimuth for counterfire on this. So it took a lot of casualties. And so I had mentioned on the 18th that Sugarloaf was taken, but we were still unable to outflank the Shuri line. And General Shepard had one more card to play, and that was a 4th Marine Regiment. And so they came up early on the morning of the 19th, and they took a lot of casualties from these guns that I just described. And the exchange between our regiment and the 4th Marine Regiment was very difficult. In other words, they were being fired upon before they even got in the line. And so there was a small amount of rain early in the morning. And when I evacuated my mortar position and just had gone a few yards, I was hit by one of those big guns. And so anyway, the 4th Marines came up. They did a magnificent job. They consolidated their position. They took the ridge, the horseshoe ridge, and they drove on to the banks of the river at Naha. And they did a magnificent job, and they did this in all the mud that you described. So anyway, the war was over for me.
So another one of the brutalities of this war, this battle, which made so many of our guys suffer from combat fatigue, huge cases of it, which had not been the case as much in other places, were things like Eugene Sledge's book describes, but also was in part the Okinawans. We have to remember that during this period of time, over 110,000 Okinawans, depending who you talk to, died. And in fact, they had an art called Bingata, and they were one person away from losing that entire art form by the end of the Battle of Okinawa. For them, it was a typhoon of steel. And the Japanese had not treated the Okinawans very well. They had conscripted a lot of them. The entire Japanese population had been conscripted, in fact, in February. And the Okinawans are going to get caught up, and the Japanese are going to have them move north or move south. And before long, they're going to be going south. The army is going to be going south. And the island gets smaller and smaller and smaller with more and more people all intertwined. And many of my Marines have said that for them was the hardest part of all. And I thought I would read something that a good friend of Neal's told me at one time, and that's Dick Whitaker, Neal. The Okinawans volunteered to retreat with the Japanese. So as the island got narrower, the density of the population increased. It was Japs and Okinawans and kids and old people and ducks and dogs and cats, everything was smashed together. And it's hard to sort them out when you're the attacking force. You can make some serious mistakes as a Marine if you don't treat them all as an enemy until you've had a chance to sort it out. So I'm sure a lot of civilians were killed, especially at night. Despite all the warnings and leaflets, they would try to come through the lines at night. And that's the worst thing they could have tried to do. Here again, this happened on Okiru. It was no one I knew. And as I said, we were converging. There were all these other units. One day we'd be next to George Company, and the next day we'd be next to Easy Company. And I even think at times we got close to the 1st Division. Anyway, we were going through a small village, and there were some guys ahead of us. A small group of guys were screwing around a house. We asked them what they were doing, and the guy said, "There's like a great samurai sword in there." The guy's trying to get it out, but he's afraid it's booby trap. So he's throwing a little piece of rope and trying to hook it. Anyway, he finally gets this thing hooked and drags it out the front door, and it's a beauty. Then the sword case is just inside the door. So the guy walks in, picks up the sword case, and blew himself up. It was the sword case that was booby trapped.
Oh, geez.
So the Okinawans themselves are going to have a really, really, really tough time of it during this battle. Neal, tell me about your exposure to the Okinawans themselves.
Yes, we were very kind to them and did a lot of things for them and shared our provisions with them. And many of them had been put in barbed wire fenced areas in order to protect them, from all this artillery fire that you're describing. And I do know that some Okinawans were in the Japanese army, and some of the kids were like spying on our lines and so forth. It was difficult to sort that out.
And they were told that we would eat their children and rape their women.
Oh,
so they were in a really untenable position, weren't they?
Certainly. And I would like to point out that the Army and the Marine Corps, both and their logistics, brought food and rice and diapers and all kinds of unimaginable things for the Okinawan people, and that should be emphasized sometimes when we hear it. And of course, there had been some rapes or something. I'm not saying that's normal, but that would be a rarity when we were there on Okinawa.
So you are wounded and they evacuate you in a unique way. Tell us how they evacuated you.
Well, yes. They took me to the rear and turned me over to the Army hospital, which was a big pit with a tent over it. And there was a doctor, his name was Coach, Koch, and he told me, Sonny, he said, I'm going to irrigate your through and through wound on your right calf. I'm getting all the caral sand out of it and so forth, and your nerves will fuse together, but you will always have an ache or two, and you're just something you just have to live with. And he was absolutely correct. And so 2 days later, I flew out of Yantan airfield, first day, and I flew to Guam, to Fleet Hospital 111. And when I arrived there, I saw half of my company there. they were eating ice cream and enjoying all the good things possible. But the point I'm trying to make is we lost about 65%.
And many of these companies on Okinawa will have 150% turnover. And they weren't necessarily very good to their replacements either, because they saw them as a liability. They didn't want to get close to anybody again. So in turn, those new guys had an even tougher time in the field.
I think that's a fair statement, Laurie. And I would point out, you had mentioned earlier about combat fatigue and so forth. I was with a group of young people who thought they were cowards and so forth. I've learned out later that I was wrong. But the 6th Marine Division was prepared for combat fatigue, and the doctors were ready. And all they needed really was 2 or 3 days rest and some honest discussion helped that way. And most of them volunteered to go back and fight.
Right.
And I can understand that.
Right. And you know, the studying that I've done, the more protracted and the worse the conditions are, the more likely that is to happen. And like you said, a couple days rest. You saw it in the Battle of the Wilderness during the Civil War too. They had more problems with people.
Well, don't forget, some of these men were on their 2nd, 3rd campaign.
And it got to be too much. And they had seen too much, had seen too many people die, and those kinds of things. So yes, absolutely. Because even though there were lots of young guys who this was their first and only battle, they were supplementing hardened, well-experienced Marines and Army personnel. So, when did you hear about the bomb?
Well, I was in the hospital in Portsmouth when that happened. I guess that was on the 6th and 9th, the 2 bombs that were dropped. But
and what was the thought at the time?
Well, a wonderful thing. Maybe the war will be over. At the time, I never believed the Japanese would ever surrender. You know, they would never surrender. And I think really, in retrospect, they surrendered to the nuclear weapons that were dropped. That was one way of saving face, as it were. But I think it was a good thing, and as you has often pointed out, that a lot of these people complaining about the dropping the nuclear devices, that they in fact would not even be here if their grandfathers and fathers were in the battle for downfall for the invasion of Japan. So it's ludicrous, and even the Japanese people will tell you that it was a good thing. It ended the war and saved a lot of lives. Just how it would be if the 10,000 planes that were coming from Europe and to deliver more napalm to Japan, there wouldn't be Japanese alive, perhaps.
Yeah, you know, we sometimes often it's forgotten how bad the firebombing, both of Dresden and then you look at Tokyo, et cetera, and so forth, were as far as taking life. Many of the statistics or many of the things that I read when I was doing my research, you would read that in the planning, after the 2nd week of the invasion of mainland Japan, they stopped talking about the Marine Corps. That's 6 divisions. The Marine Corps only has 4 now. One is a reserve. So they completely even stopped talking about the Marine Corps. They were still using caskets in Vietnam that they had planned for the mainland invasion. So I know that my guys will tell you that they knew the period of time that the invasion was supposed to occur, so they knew the day of their death.
Laura, I think Jack is back on. Jack, are you with us?
Good.
Yes, I'm back again.
There you are. Good.
I
Jack.
heated up. The thing heated up again and shut off on me. So
So Jack, what did you think when you heard about the atomic bomb?
I figured the end is near.
Did you have any comprehension of what that was?
Did I have any what?
Comprehension of what that was?
Not a great deal, no. I heard about it before it dropped. There was rumors going around. I can't give you any solid information on it, but yes, that hastened the end of the war, of course, and I agreed with the dropping of the bomb.
And you
saved
were
an awful lot of lives.
And you were still on Okinawa at the end of the battle, correct?
Yes.
And so were you still there even when they had dropped the bomb?
Oh, yes.
And
I was still there for 6 months later.
okay. And what were your thoughts about this invasion that you thought was coming prior to the bomb being dropped?
I don't know if I gave too much thought to it, because at that point of time, the bomb was dropped, and then all I was concerned about is what we were doing at the moment, not
Right.
what was next.
Right.
I was worried about today and not tomorrow.
Gotcha.
Laura, it's getting late and want to leave
Yeah.
some time for questions.
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So I know there's one question. Laura, could I ask you to take your, to stop sharing the screen?
Sure. Absolutely.
I know there was one question I saw in the chat room here, and it involves Henry Sledge. Henry, someone posted the question is, tell us about the uniform in the frame behind you.
That is my dad's dungaree jacket.
Wow.
And that's also right there is his K-bar, and then a Japanese bayonet that he took off Peleliu. I don't know if you can see that very well.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of my dad's stuff. He brought a lot of it home, and I was fortunate to be able to have it. So
yeah. On the program we did with you last year, you showed us some of the pages from your dad's diary. And
yeah, I have his Bible where he took his notes.
Yeah, that's like, I don't know, that's like finding Viking gold from 10,000 years ago or something,
I know you. I mean, if you want me to, I can grab it so Laura can see it. She seemed real interested in that, but I don't want to take time away from Neal and Jack here.
Well, let's ask the audience. Sean, do you know of any other questions that have been asked, or does anyone in the audience have questions?
I do not see any other questions across the social media streams or here on chat, other than what was behind
Robert
Henry there.
I see
Greg,
Yost.
oh, and Trey both have their hand up. Greg, if you'd like to go first.
Yes. Wow. What a program. I don't want to nerd out too much on history, on sort of the bigger picture, but that's me. For those of you who don't know me, there were a few things. There were some rather sophisticated weapons that started to get introduced on Okinawa for the first time. There were bombs that the U.S. would drop that instead of hitting the ground, they would explode. They were sort of radio. They had little radars in them that were programmed to explode maybe 15, 20, 30 feet above the ground for more maximum effect. And, that's getting into the early range of smart bombs. I remember talking to an Okinawa veteran one time who, I guess he was in the Marines. Let's see, when he was on a ship, he was in the Marines. When he was on land, he was in the Navy. He was tied in with a light cruiser, and his Jeep, this is 1945. He had a Jeep, they had a Jeep that was set up that had 4 radio antennas sort of sticking off the 4 corners of the Jeep. And they were tied in with a light cruiser offshore. They had practiced on Hawaii and Guam. And they would radio in their coordinates, and the ship had radio control to tell them where they were. It would give a target, say 400 yards or 600 yards, compass heading 280 from our position. And the cruiser would phone it in, 5-10 minutes worth of double checking. and then, say, okay, we're firing. And then this hail of shells would come down on this Japanese position to an incredibly accurate degree. That was, this was the first time they had this coordinated sort of radio controlled fire with advanced forward controllers. You're getting into some pretty modern weaponry here. Two other comments, and then I do want to ask your guys a question after all this. One is that for the invasion of Japan, no Purple Hearts have been minted since the summer of 1945. Every Purple Heart that's been awarded was minted in July and August of 45 in preparation for the invasion of Japan. The second is that the second atomic bombing was the weather was bad and they had the plane in the air. They didn't know what target they wanted to hit, so the plane was running out of gas. It actually landed on Okinawa, basically on fumes. It never made it back to Tinian. It had no chance of making it back that far. So it landed actually on Okinawa, which shows you how close the Okinawa really was to the main islands of Japan. Now, at long last, my question: when you guys were on Okinawa, what did May 7th or May 8th mean to you? What did VE Day mean, if anything at all, when you guys were in the middle of this fight?
Neal and Jack, do you understand the question?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did.
Jack?
Well, that part of the war is done. Now we're going to get more people over here to finish the job.
Okay. Neal?
The same as Jack mentioned. We would have more assets to pursue the war.
Right. And there was the backup Greg's point. People don't remember this or understand it. There was a huge amount of resources being transferred from the European theater to the Pacific theater. The whole 8th Air Force was going to be based on Okinawa. The parachute divisions in Europe were coming to the Pacific theater. It was a tremendous effort that was underway in anticipation of invading Japan. Look, one other question I see up there, Trey, is that you asking with your hand up?
Yes, that is me.
Hey,
thank you. So we briefly touched on this, but as you can see, I really like naval history and I like boats. And one of the things, we briefly touched on this, but one of the things that's kind of one of the entry level stories you hear about when you're going into the naval history space is the death of Operation Tengo and the death of the Yamato. This big battleship. It's almost Japan's Bismarck, if you will. Big battleship roams the seas looking for battles, but is sunk by 1,000 cuts, right? 600 aircraft, I think it is, that attacked it.
Loss of 15.
Yeah, I think it was like 10 or 12 aircraft carriers that were sent to attack it.
Yeah, but I'm saying that we only lost 15 aircraft.
Yeah. I know the anti-aircraft guns on the Yamato couldn't actually fire if they were angled above 70 or below 20 degrees, which is not good for an anti-aircraft gun. But what a lot of people really don't realize is the tactical side of it, or how did the strategic what was the strategic significance of the sinking of the Yamato? Because I'd assume, lack of air cover, you have all your carriers, I think even like escort carriers were pulled to sink it. So you have no air cover over the island. How did that affect the battle here, or did it have no effect and is just a story we hear nowadays? It's a poetic symbol of the end of Japan.
Laura, you want to take a shot at that? I'm not quite sure.
So one of the things about the Yamato that a lot of people don't realize is that where the Yamato was going was, it is symbolic in the sense that the Yamato was going there to be beached. Here is the star, right? And they were going to go beach it and use it as just another fortress on Okinawa to tie the Americans up. So here's your star. Its sister's already been sunk, and they were going to sacrifice it.
Yeah. And just the last comment on that, and if there's other questions, we'll get to them because we need to end. But, the two battleships, the Yamato and the Musashi, were actually, and last month we interviewed a torpedo bomber off the USS Franklin who put a torpedo into the Musashi in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Interesting guy, Bob Freely.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I wish I was there.
Bob Freely. Look it up on YouTube.
It'll be on our YouTube
right?
channel. You can check our YouTube channel for all of our past programs, and it'll be there.
Bob Freely, 100 years old, fascinating man. Anyway, they were huge strategic mistakes for the Japanese military because they end up soaking up huge amount of resources into those two battleships, which hardly ever saw any strategic military action.
And even then, they weren't much better than the Iowas either.
Well, their best sailors were put on those things. They were really just very luxurious for that time, floating hotels for most of the war. So, thank you, Trey. Are there other questions? Yes, I see.
Robert.
Miswa, yeah.
Yeah, I remember years ago seeing, remember Victory at Sea, and I forgot what the other black and white historical newsreels were. I remember seeing one on Okinawa, and they were like in a cove, and they were like U.S. Soldiers speaking in Japanese to women who were jumping off the cliffs into the water because they've been so propagandized by the Japanese. You're going to be raped, your kids are going to be butchered. And evidently some of the women decided not to jump, and they were totally shocked at how they were treated so well by the U.S. soldiers. And they even showed some excerpts of the U.S. troops encouraging some Japanese soldiers to come out of the caves, and you see these young Japanese soldiers coming out, just so fearful, like, oh, these Americans, they're going to slit my throat, cut my finger, and shocked by how well they were treated. Just to show you how propagandized, the Japanese military did to the civilians and to the soldiers, and
Okinawa they do have the area they call Suicide Cliffs, but that is more because Usajima committed seppuku there. Okinawans did commit suicide in all kinds of ways on Okinawa, but where the big jumping off the cliffs, the majority of it was at Saipan. Yeah. That was just horrendous, but there was some of that on Okinawa as well.
Yeah, it's just that it's burned in my memory banks because I remember there was a U.S. soldier with a loudspeaker who could speak fluent Japanese, trying to encourage them, please don't jump, we're not going to harm you. And I'm just shaking my head saying, oh,
yeah,
all those women that jumped with their children off. It was just, heartbreaking to see that. It really was.
Okay, listen, we need to end the program. I want to thank all of our guests for being on. Laura Lacey, your knowledge of the Battle of Okinawa and your interviewing of all these veterans is incredibly interesting and valuable work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Henry Sledge, it's always great to see you, and it's a pleasure to have you on the program and comment on your father's books. By the way, did you find your copy of your father's Bible? You want to hold it up there and let
it's in the back room. I mean, I can get it really quick if you want.
No, that's all right. We need to sign off.
Laura, we can be in touch.
Perfect. Good. Sounds good.
I'd love to talk to you and Neal, and I'd like to talk to the torpedo bomber pilot too from the Musashi. But anyway, yeah, totally happy to be here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Look that recording up, Henry, on our YouTube website. It really one of my favorite programs and one of my favorite stories about him. So, and of course, Neal and Jack Morrow, thank you very much for being on the program. You're our heroes of the day. I just can't. I get goosebumps thinking about 17-year-olds volunteering to join the Marines, knowing where they were going and what was going to happen to them. So bless both of you. Thank you very much for your time and your energy, and hope you have a great rest of the day. Sean, is there anything we need to close on?
No, thank you, everyone. We'll be back Monday night. We hope to see you all there. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and have a safe and wonderful weekend.
I'll put in a plug for our program next month. The program next month is on John Red Morgan, Medal of Honor winner, 8th Air Force, B-17 co-pilot. And we're going to do it jointly with the Medal of Honor Museum out of Arlington, Texas.
Ah,
So that ought to be very good. We hope to have his son on, Sam Morgan. So, okay.
Neal, stay off the Skyline.
Yes, yes, off the Skyline.
Bye, bye,
That's
Jack.
a fire, Neal.
Skyline. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.